We'll have an entire, there we go, we'll have an entire presentation with one slide, I think, right, you can focus on us. So, I'm Luke Hugel, I'm with Robert Bosch. We'll talk a lot about what Bosch does in mobility, along with our other partners that Toby just referenced with AWS, 10th Street, and Schneider National in a little bit. I just wanted to say that first and foremost, thank you. I know we decided that we were going to do this event literally last year at MATS. How could we do this to make it worthwhile to a VIP audience of fleet owners and leaders? And we've put together what I think is a really great program for you today to kick off the show before we even have the opportunity to walk in. So please enjoy breakfast, enjoy the time that we have here, and I hope that this is as educational but also inspirational for you, because we're not going to talk about challenges and risks and concerns. We're going to talk about opportunities, and that's exciting. So for me, why am I excited and why am I here? Why am I a part of transportation? It's actually in my blood. My mom worked in the traffic office. That's what I knew when I grew up. My first jobs were in transportation, and they weren't cushy jobs for a recent college graduate sitting in a chair with a computer screen in front of me. I had the opportunity to be out loading boxes, and then loading those boxes onto trailers, and then doing that in the middle of the night at cross docks. In Minneapolis, it's really cold, the snow is blowing across the dock. You learn a lot. I also had the opportunity to audit driver routes, sitting alongside drivers that are delivering freight every night. You learn real first-hand experience of what their job is like, and ways that you can then help make it more efficient. That's literally what I get to do now over 20 years later. Just have the power of one of the largest mobility companies in the world with Robert Bosch behind me. We'll talk a lot more about that in this logistics operating system that we have up here today. But we'll get there. First, for those that like structure and a quick agenda, we'll run through this. I will kick us off and talk a little bit about that heritage of mobility in Bosch, and then we'll have some industry leaders come up, and they'll talk about an industry overview, and that will be Janusz Packard from AWS Industries. Then we'll have thought leaders from Schneider and from 10th Street. That'll be Mike Kakala and Tim Crawford. Then I'll come back up and talk a little bit about how Bosch is tying our messaging together and bringing value to the transportation and logistics. And then finally, we'll have a Q&A, and we'll have an opportunity to hear from you and interact with you. And there'll also be some giveaways as we go throughout the day. So what I'd like to do now, very quickly, is do a brief introduction and call up the rest of our presenters. So first, Janusz Packard, AWS Industries lead for transportation and logistics. Janusz has over 25 years of experience in our space, working for companies like AWS, National Laboratories, Schneider National, and now a division of PwC. Throughout his career, he's had the opportunity to lead strategy and general management and leadership and executive functions that have driven real change to profitable results within organizations that he's consulted for or led. Academically speaking, Janusz also has an MBA from Wharton and a Master's of Engineering from Cornell. So please help me welcome Janusz Packard to the stage. Our next presenter, Mike Kakala, a Senior Vice President at Schneider, responsible for the supply chain and distribution organization. Mike's team is known as an innovative leader within Schneider's organization, recently launching a digital marketplace, as well as other technical initiatives within a very traditional, very large organization of Schneider. Mike's team is responsible for the collaboration of over 70,000 third-party fleets, as well as technology vendors, warehouse distributors, freight forwarders. Mike and I have had the opportunity to work together 20 years ago, and now an opportunity for us to work together again, and it's very exciting. I welcome Mike Kakala to the stage.
And our last presenter is Tim Crawford. Back in 2006, Tim co-founded a driver management technology company called 10th Street. Since 2016, Tim has also acted as the CEO of 10th Street, driving some of the best driver management solutions for our industry today. Prior to 10th Street, Tim worked for a large background check organization that focused on technology as well as operations. Tim even started his career in public accounting. Please help me welcome Tim Crawford to the stage. So let's get into this. One slide, one little discussion about why Bosch. As a show of hands, and I want honesty, please. Who has heard of Bosch before? Okay, I'm going to say over half, not quite even to 75%, and that's completely fair. We are one of the largest, quietest companies in the world. We are over a $90 billion organization worldwide. We have operations in sectors of industrial technologies, building technology and automation. Where most of us have heard of Bosch is usually in our consumer goods sectors. We do make some of the world's best dishwashers. We have many appliances in our various lines, but also people may know us for our power tools. And to that point, I would like to thank Chip from Upstaging. Can you stand up, Chip? Chip was the first person to join us today. So as a thank you to Chip, we have a power tool for you. And one of our team will bring it to you as soon as they're done checking people in. It's going to be a little bit of a theme, especially when we get to the Q&A, if I can foreshadow a little bit. All right. But what I've talked about so far with Bosch, those are smaller pieces of our business compared to mobility. It's where our heritage lies. For over 130 years, Bosch has been a leader in mobility. In fact, in 1908, one of the first sensors that ever went onto a mobility device happened when Robert Bosch put a sensor on a bicycle tire to test the air pressure and then sold it to a bicycle tire manufacturer. Since then, we have produced trillions of sensors, a significant amount of hardware, a significant amount of software and systems that make vehicles run. In fact, every single one of your vehicles that you have in your fleets, every vehicle that you drive in your personal lives has hardware, software, or systems in it from Bosch. We are not only the world's largest tier 1 manufacturer for the auto industry, but we are also one of the world's largest mobility enablers. And that's a lot of what is bringing us into this setting today. And it isn't just in passenger cars. It truly is in the commercial vehicle space that makes us so relevant. In fact, we have a unique position that we know how vehicles start and stop. We know how they're propelled, regardless of the fuel that it takes. We know how they steer. We know how they brake. We know the systems within the vehicle that connect them, the electrical architecture of those vehicles. We understand how vehicles are connected to the outside world, outside of that vehicle, because we've been doing that and we've been leading for many, many decades. So it gives us an incredibly strong foundation when we look at how we can provide value to the transportation industry, because we know the vehicle so well. That's an anchor point for us. And that's what we bring to the discussion today. To that point, let's get into it. Transportation truly makes the economy move. Without it, and without each and every one of you in this room, every global economy would grind to a halt. Full stop statement. That's how important it is. And it's not always glamorous, and it's not always easy, but it is incredibly important and a backbone, foundational element of the global economy. Now, there is transformation that's occurring. And as I said before, we're not here to talk about risks and danger and watch out. We're talking about how transportation is transforming, and that brings opportunity. We know this in terms of, let's just talk as easy as a load. Not every load is created equal. With a little bit of information and a little bit of intelligence, we can determine what is a good load, what's a bad load. We won't talk about driver shortages as a problem, but instead what solutions can be brought to enable better recruiting, retention, training, and safety of drivers. Supply chain solutions, they don't add layers of complexity and system integration nightmares for fleets. They bring value by bringing a reduction of complexity, by increasing efficiency, thereby driving profitability and a bottom line. Those are the things that we're going to talk about today. So I'm very excited that you're here with us, very appreciative that you're here, and we're going to continue now with Janusz to talk about a state of the industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Luke started with saying that transportation and logistics is his blood, and made me think a little bit about our family. My father actually was in the transportation logistics industry, shipping. I'm in the industry, and my daughter just started at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and told me that she's going to be studying logistics as well, so might make it 3 generations. I'm part of AWS Industries, and supporting vertical solutions or industry solutions has been a strategy for our company. Our CEO would say that we want to support customers in their business transformations, not just in cloud transformation journeys. And that is why understanding industries, understanding our customers' businesses has always been pretty important for us. So sometimes we think AWS is a cloud provider, but we have been specializing in industries for a few years now. We talk to customers across the transportation and logistics industry. And the sub-segments of the industry that we take a look at would be trucking, it's shipping, which includes the ocean carriers and ports. It's going to be the rail, intermodal providers. It's also going to be the logistics service providers, so contract logistics, distribution centers, and so on, as well as air. And the reason that this is important, and I mention it, even though we will be focused on trucking today, is the interdependencies. If freight moves from a point in China, let's suppose to somewhere in the United States, it could change hand about 14 times between dray providers, port services, shipping companies, air, trucking, intermodal, and so on. And one of the challenges has always been, how do you think about the network? And what are the impacts of the bullwhip effect? So the variation in one node and how it sort of like percolates through the rest of the supply chain. So the reason that we think about the industry as a whole is the impact of that and the sort of like overall network impacts of it. What we are seeing in the industry right now, there's a huge backdrop, right, of the macroeconomic condition. Interest rates are going higher. We probably are out of the lower zero interest rate environment that we have enjoyed for the last 15 years. Geopolitical changes are happening. And global commerce is a reflection of geopolitics. And the reason this, again, becomes important is as manufacturing starts to shift, perhaps, to different places in Southeast Asia or to nearshore, whether it is the United States or Mexico, Canada, freight flows will change. And that will impact all of us who are providing transportation services. And that goes to the heart of resiliency. It's one topic I will talk about. But I think what COVID has exposed is the kind of risk that we had in our supply chains. Since 2000, I believe supply chains were optimized for efficiency, cost reductions. But what COVID has exposed is the cost of that cost efficiency. And it's now much more about risk, and we do believe that diversification will happen in the supply chain. And each subsegment of the industry is dealing with its own challenges as we look at the post-COVID sort of era. If you take a look at what's happening in the postal business, mail volume is going down significantly, probably 20 to 25% per year. E-commerce packages is increasing, but it's not increasing fast enough. And what that means is, last mile, those kinds of areas of the business become important. Sorting becomes completely different in the postal business. So the implications are different by subsegment, and we see changes happening. One other thing I would like to point to is in the shipping industry, the 2M alliance starting to breaking up now. So MSC has announced that it wants to be primarily a shipping company and focus on that, while Merck's believes in vertical integration. And it has been making acquisitions, leveraging the extraordinary profits it has made over the last 2 years to get into things like air or even inland logistics, drayage and so on. So there are different strategies that different companies are employing as they get out of the COVID era and think about how to position themselves for the next one. The other trend I just wanted to mention, which is macro in nature that we see, is the extraordinary investment that has been made in this space. Typically, the bias would be that transportation and logistics is behind or lagging in terms of technology. Though for us who have been in the industry, we know that there is a lot of technology in the business already. However, between 2020 and 2021, the investment in logistics from a technology standpoint has actually doubled, about $25 billion, which is going into a lot of the startups and so on and so forth who are now looking to create solutions in the market. And the top 3 areas where that investment is going is in things like last mile logistics because of the rapid growth of e-commerce, no surprise there. The second one would be more in the parcel side, as I mentioned, the sorting technologies, what is needed from an automation standpoint. And the third one would be in visibility. Again, it's the visibility that is needed across the supply chain so that each node or each entity that delivers services there has better idea of what might be happening across. So those are the macro trends that are happening in the space. And these are some of the things that we pick up in terms of the customer conversations that we have. And the first one is revenue management. Luke started with every load is not equal. And the conversations have been shifting from, say, 2022, where it was about maximizing pricing, if you will, dynamic pricing, because customers or companies were taking a goal at maximizing their capacity. Now it's about saying more about utilization and saying, are we accepting the light load? So it's a subtle difference, but the move has happened because the pricing in the markets has dropped significantly. Labor shortages are still significant. I think Tim will cover the driver piece of it, but it's happening in ports. For those of us who fly for work know that there are shortages on the pilot side of the house as well. Just focused on trucking and the labor shortages on the driver side, it's real. To Luke's point, it is an opportunity. And it is an opportunity to talk about how to retain or even attract talent to the industry, how to think about driver experience, and that could pertain to using that as a motivation even in terms of planning loads. And those are the kinds of opportunities that I believe are available in this space. A third one is operational efficiency. So like I said, for the last 2 years, it was all about revenue growth. But as demand is starting to soften now, there is a conversation about leverage of technology, optimization of processes to get after operational efficiency. How do you drive costs out of the business? And these are all areas. It could be from yard management, it could be about preventive maintenance, it could be about customer care, because typically this has been a high cost aspect of the business, and how to leverage technology to get after these efficiencies. Sustainability continues to be a big topic in the industry. My view is it's going to be driven by what's happening in Europe and some of the regulations that are coming down. I actually was at the TPM conference earlier in the year, and the shipping carriers are actually starting to calculate the cost of CO2 at a container level. If you talk to BCOs, they are interested in the cost of the carbon footprint at the SKU at the product level. So based on where you are in the value chain, the topics of sustainability are different, but it's all the way from saying what fuels can be used to setting up infrastructure, to saying, do we even have the calculations, base calculations of what the carbon footprint is correctly. At TPM, they actually did present costs that had been calculated by 3 carriers on a container between Asia and Europe, and the range was 100%. So there is a lot of work to be done in terms of saying what is the cost of the carbon footprint and applying to the various stages of transport. Digital transformation. This is one which is very interesting. Digital transformation is just not about the application of technology to solve some of these things that we are talking about. It actually is broader and has to take into account the non-technical aspects. And the topics of conversation here are how do business and technology actually work together? How do you create an operating model that makes companies more agile and able to respond? What happened in the Suez Canal about a year and a half ago was very difficult to predict, right? It's a black swan event, not able to predict. But what is possible for companies to do is to say that how do you react when an event like that happens? And that's at the heart of digital transformation. And the final one is autonomous and automation. I'll speak about automation in the next one. But in terms of autonomous, there's a lot of discussion which is going on. It might be about 3 to 5 years away, potentially, but the implications will be huge, right? It will change how we think about networks, hybrid networks, where autonomous will work, where it not. In an industry where drivers are paid by the distance that they drive, and if you think about if the long haul distances are going to be done by autonomous, that has an implications on driver pay and so on, and how or who would want to work in this industry. So quite a few debates going on as to what autonomous would mean beyond even the safety and the other concerns that are being investigated right now. This is a little bit about how we think about it from the Amazon.com standpoint in terms of the future of supply chains. And it really starts with connectivity. As I said before, in global supply chains, there are multiple players involved. And connecting the supply chain, so you're not thinking about optimization for each node, but optimization across is a huge topic. And the basis for this is really connectivity for visibility. Types of visibility is different. Again, it's one of those areas where we can talk about visibility for days, but really visibility at critical events, visibility at asset hierarchies. So if you're a shipping company at the container level, if you're a trucking company, perhaps at the tractor trailer level, if you're a BCO, at the SKU level, that's the kind of conversations that are happening. But it's not going to be enough. It's almost like table stakes. The next part of it is what I would consider to be disruption management and then resiliency. So the ability to predict risk is more and more critical. Things like the Suez Canal or COVID are not possible to predict. But a lot of companies have already started using data such as weather, traffic, social media data to say if there's a fire somewhere or the labor strikes somewhere, to be able to predict risk in the supply chain. And that sort of anticipation of disruption and the ability to manage through it is really is going to be critical, I believe, for all of us. And resiliency, like I said, is having that information of prediction in time so you can actually do something about it, right? So if you know that your ship is going to be late to its berth, what is the impact for the dray providers? What is the impact for the terminal operators? And if you know that in advance, you can have alternative plans to deal with it, which is what we consider to be the definition of resiliency. The third one is robotics and automation. So robotics in a fulfillment center, and at Amazon.com, we actually have 11 generations of fulfillment centers. And the generations are defined by the level of automation that's in there. So in generation, what we consider 11, 65% of fulfillment centers are completely automated. But the next generation is actually going to be about the interactions between humans and robots, and that's where it's going. So for example, in Amazon.com fulfillment centers, when it's automated, it's actually cordoned off. So the robots can sort of like operate independently. But there are a lot more considerations if robots and humans have to intermingle, right? You don't want to knock off the humans with robots and so on and so forth. And that's really the next generation of intelligence that is being embedded to get after robotics. And automation is critical. I mean, I've been talking about the impacts of the nodes and optimization, but how long is a shipment plan good for? How long is a transportation plan good for? 3 hours, 4 hours before something happens, a tire blows out, or traffic happens, or weather comes through. So this concept of continuous planning and continuous execution is critical and happens through automation. Again, I would go back to Amazon.com, is at every fulfillment center, Amazon has over 370 fulfillment centers in our North American network. Demand is forecasted at a frequency of 15 minutes at a fulfillment center level. And that kind of frequency cannot happen unless there is automation. So automation is a key concept in terms of what next generation supply chains or logistics networks need to look at. Sustainability, we talked about. I'll just add a couple of comments here. One is, again, wide, it's a huge topic. One thing I would talk about is in the e-commerce space. If you look at physical commerce, the returns could be about 8 to 9%. In e-commerce, it's 30%. Significant cost, significant impact to sustainability. And all aspects of it are looked at, including the size of the boxes, in combining orders, if you will, so you have to have one box instead of 3. Drivers who are actually delivering also acting as pickup, sort of like also return pickup drivers. Those are all the kinds of areas that are being considered to say, how do you get to a lower footprint or a more sustainable network? And the last one is granular or entity behavior. And I think this is one of the most interesting ones. If you take a look at different nodes, ports behave differently, DCs behave differently. And what I mean by that is dock doors, throughputs. When you take a look at carriers, drivers and so on and so forth will be different, right? Domicile based. Drivers might want to come home at a certain point in time, 3 to 4 days, or they might not want to work on certain days, or they might want to say, I want to be home for a baseball game or something like that. That is a personalization element. And while this is a B2B business, B2C components like personalization are critically important in this. And the granularity that is needed to be able to model that is where things are going. If you take a look at last mile logistics, for example, how much do we know, especially in urban centers, about key drop-off points? If you're delivering to a building, do you know that there is going to be a person there who a concierge or something that you have to drop things off at? Do we actually know the address, or is it like 50, 20 yards away? This is granular information, but it makes the difference between the ability to deliver, say, 10 packages or 15 packages on a run. And this is the business about details, and these kinds of details will be very important to drive efficiency. So far we have been talking about what are the kinds of differentiated experiences that we can deliver for customers. And in some cases, it's fairly easy, right? Deliver my package when you ask me to deliver it at the lowest cost possible, and tell me when you're going to do it. Getting there, I think, is the challenge in our business. But at the end of this, what are the fundamental aspects that are enabling this or making this happen? And it's 3 things from our perspective. It's about data. What kind of data is available within your 4 walls or outside of those 4 walls? What kind of analytical capabilities are you able to drive? A lot of it is about machine learning. There has been a lot of conversations or recently about things like ChatGPT and so on. But analytical capabilities are critical in terms of this supply chain. And the last one I talked about is automation. The ability to connect this, the ability to see what the changes are so that you have this concept of continuous planning and continuous execution will be key. The next question then becomes, how do we make all of this happen? And coming from AWS, the concept of platforms is pretty critical. One of the things that we talked about is multiple stakeholders in global logistics networks, in global supply chains, and that's why conversations like this, I believe, are extremely important. You have different players from the industry, Schneider, 10th Street, Bosch, AWS, collaborating on creating a platform like this. That I think is fundamental in terms of the collaboration that is needed, in terms of the integration that is needed to make this thing happen. When we talk about integration and the ability to connect, it really starts with the basics. I mean, how do you start to connect? It could be about things like, there's a basic network connectivity that is needed. I think, have moved past that a little bit because of our usage of the internet and our ability to say, yep, everybody just connected. But that basic connectivity is pretty important. Availability, right, in terms of sharing. There is a lot of conversation about where the data can be shared. Is it going to be region specific and so on? So making those sorts of things available is pretty important. And and one of the most critical aspects is security. For different players to be able to share information, security is pretty critical. You have to trust that if you're going to be sharing information with other players outside of your four walls, the data exchange is going to be secure. And what we say at AWS is security is job one. It's a fundamental concept of trust without which the other things will not happen. So once the connectivity starts, this is almost building on top of this platform. The next one is data. And this is where it really starts to get complicated. The integration layers that are necessary to bring together data is important. And data will be different, right? It will be from perhaps enterprise systems such as TMS and TOS. It could be from various devices, the Internet of Things, the billions of sensors that are going to be prevalent in the industry. And the last one is data sources also. What I mentioned earlier is the sheer amount of investment that is going in the space. And one of the things that I've seen is more industry data being available in probably the last 5-6 years than I saw in the 20 years before that. There are players like DAT on the trucking side, Zenet on the shipping side, who are now starting to make this data available and reliable data. I mean, that's the key, right? Reliable data available in this space, which is necessary to integrate. Data will be different. It could be numeric data, right? Numbers. It could be a language or documents and so on. So natural language processing becomes important. Image data, streaming data. And one of the keys here is the ability to be able to process, ingest, and then process these different kinds of data in a purpose-built manner. The old technologies, which was much more relationship database driven, does not cut it. If you take a look at a company like Uber, what they need is location-based data because that's where they make a lot of decisions. If you think about tracing, data which is immutable is important. So it's more blockchain-driven technology. So the ability from your use case standpoint to say these are the different kinds of data that we need to deal with and what are the technologies that are available to deal with that is extraordinarily important. One more thing I will say from the data standpoint, which is critical, is it almost seems as if there is a lot of data available now. And it is sorting through the data. It is making sure that the data is relevant. That becomes important. I was just looking at some stats the other day which said that load boards, right? About 30-40%, and might have been the reflection of the industry over the last 2 years where capacity was so tight. But duplicate loads might be about 30% of all the loads available on the load boards. So if you're a carrier and you're trying to decide on the aggregation of demand of which loads you want to accept, it really starts with saying what information do I believe? So those are the kinds of things that we'll have to take a look at from the industry standpoint and say how do you actually make it happen so that the information is relevant or is trustworthy across the thousands of load boards that we have in the industry right now. The last one is we have all this data. Now, what is the data useful for? And that's where some of the use cases or some of the applications that we talked about make sense, right? It's about revenue management, things like load acceptance, which loads do you accept? It's about operational efficiency, those kinds of things. So those are the use cases that are critical to be able to drive business efficiency, sustainable businesses and so on and so forth, which is the third layer of the platform, if you will. So this is what we believe is necessary, collaboration across industry players to make this happen. The second one is this layering on of the data layer and the ability from a horizontal standpoint to be able to get data and share data And the third thing is the analytics layer on top of that to be able to drive the decision making that is necessary. And the last part, again, I will come back to is automation. Because one thing that is prevalent in our business is time frames for which things are relevant. And unless it's automated, it's very difficult to get to that continuous planning, continuous execution. So I think there are extraordinary things actually happening in our industry. I personally am very excited as to the kinds of things we are going to be able to do in the industry over the next 8 to 10 years and deal with all the changes and opportunities in front of us. So that actually concludes my remarks, and I will hand it over to Mike. Thank you.
Now, every time I listen to him, I learn something new, and I think you did a great job summarizing many of the topics that are circulating our industry. The problem statements that I heard, and you'll see a little bit of this play in the slides that I'm going to show you, is the need to connect systems so that we can be much more efficient, and then how do we interpret data quickly and put it into action. And I think those are both very important, because what we've studied on the Schneider side is that the cycle changes in the market are changing far quicker, on average right around 18 months. And the volatility when it goes from a shipper-friendly market to a carrier-friendly market is far more severe than the preceding 20 years. So our ability to connect, interpret data, get control, and make decisions is absolutely critical. Before I begin my prepared remarks, I really want to just take a second and speak to this group and just say thank you. In the last 2.5 years, our country, the world, has gone through a lot from the pandemic. Our workforce has transitioned primarily from in the office to at home, and there's a lot of disruption in the day-to-day activity. Yet the professional driver and the fleet owner did not stop what they were doing. There was no option for them to go to the home. And there was a lot of questions, whether you're in a warehouse or in the office, on how safe can I be? Am I protecting myself? Am I protecting my family? The professional driver and the fleet owner, they had to keep on trucking. And so for that reason, whenever I have a chance to speak to a group, and I know that there's going to be carriers in the audience, I always want to start off by just saying thank you. I think you have made our country better, and you've made our economy stronger, and I don't think it's said enough to this group, so thank you for everything that you've done. As Luke alluded to, my name is Mike Kukella. I've been with Schneider for over 19 years, both on the carrier side, where I've had opportunity to manage a bulk fleet, as well as our cross-dock final mile delivery services and manufacturing automotive. But most of that time has also been in logistics. So you'll see a little bit of a different slant in my slides, a lot of common themes that Jan has shared. But I'm going to share with you a little bit about the Schneider story and some of the transformation that's going on, and then how that plays into technology. Prior to Schneider, you could say that I'm somewhat of a logistics wonk. I was in the United States Army as a logistics officer, supporting the war fighter both in and outside our country. Are there any veterans in the room? Raise your hand. Oh. We're going to get you guys some Bosch drills too. I get to play Oprah too. But aside from my time at Schneider and the United States military, I think like most of the folks in the room, the last 2.5 years, we were all working on our PhD, and it was titled Overcoming Obstacles. And I think the message that you're hearing today on how do we connect our systems, how do we get the systems in place, how do we connect them, how do we share data so that we can be efficient and seek for the win-win type scenarios, help our customers win, but also help us be more efficient, is in my opinion, that's the new frontier for transportation logistics. So let's get started. As most of you know, Schneider is one of the nation's largest trucking and logistics companies. We service over 9,000 customers in just about every industry vertical, highly centralized in manufacturing, automotive, CPG, and retail. You can see that our operating structure is really best illustrated in the three pillars that you see on this particular slide. In our truckload division, you have a very expansive network, van network team. You have a dedicated solution. You have specialty freight. And you also have our bulk fleet. On the intermodal side, we have one of the largest intermodal providers in the country, great relationship with the UP in the west and CSX in the east. And then in logistics, which is the fastest growing division within Schneider, it consists of our power only. And power only is about leveraging the asset trailer and our third-party partnership. So our owner-operators, our third-party carriers, in moving that trailer. So our brokerage, our power only, and then the team that I represent, our supply chain and distribution management. And that service is really working with customers who have made a decision that they want to outsource a portion or all of their logistics and transportation. It could be what they do in the warehouse, to what they do in the ports, to I just need help with inserting a TMS or a WMS in my operation. And in that particular operation, we have got to do our job better than if they deployed capital and labor. So we're always generating a positive ROI. Our organization has 16,000 associates, 70,000, I know the slide's a little off, but 70,000 third-party carriers and 60,000 containers and trailers. And that the last two data points are critical because we're seeing a transformation in our organization where it's not just about putting a Schneider working unit, it's about also leveraging our third-party capacity where it makes sense for our network, for our customers. We can't go everywhere. We want to make sure that we're bringing partners in that can help service our customer. On this particular slide, you can see a little bit of the history of our organization, and we started with really humble beginning. Al Schneider sold his family vehicle, and he bought a truck, did regional deliveries, and from there, he's kind of diversified our organization into something that you see right now with a very broad portfolio of capabilities. There's the two data points, though, that I want to call out on this is in 1993, his son, Don Schneider, created Schneider Logistics. Schneider Logistics first started with us working with a customer on the automotive side, helping them through data, big data, understand you're driving a lot of congestion in your facilities, it's detaining our trailer, but it's also driving a lot more cost for you. And what Al did at that time through our engineering team and that data is show them that we can lower your line haul cost if you can improve your productivity in those facilities. From that discussion, that created our logistics division, and then we were one of the first organizations to create a TMS and deploy it on behalf of our customers. So there is a very rich history within this trucking company of doing things within supply chain, leveraging technology and data to help make our customers much stronger. The second data point is in 2020, and I consider that the launch of FreightPower really the culmination of almost 90 years of experience running a broad fleet, as well as deploying technology and working with our customers, and then bringing it to the marketplace and democratizing that experience for not only our customers, but also for our carriers. And I'm going to come back to that on my very last slide and talk a little bit about FreightPower. But underneath this entire history, there is a hunger and a thirst for execution excellence, process discipline, and using technology to help connect all those services, but connect them also to our customer, and more recently, especially in the last 10 years, pull in stakeholders like you folks that are in the room into our network so that we can all win-win together. So similar to what Yana shared, I think you'll see very similar themes. When you have a broad portfolio that is generating $6 billion of revenue, and we also manage another $3 billion of our customers' freight within our ecosystem, and we have all of that technology, you start to see emerging trends that are happening. And so on this particular slide, I called out the 6 to 8 emerging trends that we see, but there's 3 that I think are more on the mainstream, the ones that we deal with more consistently with customers, especially in the last 2 years. Much like all of you folks where you've had to deal with inflationary costs with finding the driver, insurance, getting the trailer, working unit, our shippers have also gone through a very high inflationary cost. Yes, you probably talked to them a little bit on the transportation, but beyond that, they have inventory, more inventory than they need. It's in the wrong places. They've changed their freight flows. In some cases, if they're importers, they're bringing them into different ports. They have more warehouse, DC, cross-dock space than they need. That adds labor, that adds taxes, that adds a lot of other ancillary costs into their supply chain. So our number one focus with shippers right now is how do we help them restructure their network to drive efficiencies? And the way we start is going right back to our roots that Don Schneider did. We start with data, and we harness their data, or if we can insert our technology, we leverage the data out of our system, and we start visualizing their network and building sophisticated scenario-based models for them so that they can understand the trade-off. For example, if they have 8 warehouses and we think they only need 4, here's the cost trade-off, but here's where you're going to have to place it so that you can optimize your fulfillment to your end customer. And in that, you need to rebalance your inventory, your freight flows are going to change. We need to look at where your supply base is at. We also help them by running procurement events and then certainly inserting talent and technology so that we can be much more efficient running that supply chain. The second macro trend out of this list here is improving the freight flows. So in the last 2.5 years, just about everybody has heard about port congestion. And what many shippers have done is deviated freight from the West Coast to the East Coast and to the South, and that's changed where they're receiving a lot of their raw material, or in some cases their finished goods. So we're in active discussions with them right now on what is the right percentage, if you want to stay resilient, that should be on the East and the South. How much do you put back into the West Coast? And then if you're shipping door to door with your steamship line, is there a more effective way where you can have greater visibility and control once that product hits the port? For example, converting it into a port to door where you have a domestic provider that's doing the dray, the transload, and then the inland transportation. Same thing coming over the border. In many cases, we're helping customers figure out how do we consolidate freight, put it on a truckload, and do multi-stop so that we can reduce your cost. There may be mode conversion where we go from truck to intermodal, in some cases intermodal back to truck if they want to increase speed within their supply chain. So it's somewhat related to lowering cost, but improving freight flow is the number 2 macro trend. And then the third one is maybe the general theme of this entire breakfast is really implementing digital solutions. If you think about what just happened for everybody outside of the professional driver and the fleet owner, is you had folks that were primarily work in the office, transitioned to work from the couch, and now they're back into a hybrid model. You also had a lot of folks that just decide I'm done working altogether. And so what that exposed for many of our customers is inefficiencies in their day-to-day workflow. Too many emails, too much paperwork, too much manual execution. Can't find the labor to do this anymore. I can't throw people at it. We have to be much more efficient. I think that's a great thing for all of us because that's going to mean they're going to be digitally connected with us. It's going to help velocity in our facilities to get your drivers and your trailers out of there so that you can generate more revenue. But in order to do that, we need to help them on their digital solution. And so Yannis talked a little bit about, the baseline is how are they connected? Are their systems first talking to each other? And if not, how do we help them talk to each other? Either production system or their WMS into the TMS. Are they talking to their vendors? Or are they digitally connected to you? Or are they sending you emails, phone calls to get you the loads? And if that's the case, how do we help them with EDI configuration or API configuration so that they can be much faster in that? Additionally, they may need some execution systems. So in the cases where they do need a TMS, Schneider's been a leader for over 30 years providing that type of capability. We're going to continue providing that, and we're going to have it integrated with that yard management, the WMS, and some of the other procurement capability that they need so that they can run their entire supply chain. Now, what I'm really excited is, as we think about those trends and the release that we had in 2020 of Freight Power, we think we're in a really good spot to lead in the industry and to help not only carriers get into a much better position, but help all of our partner carriers do that as well. And I think we're in this unique space right now where the historical one-dimension relationship from customer to supplier is changing into a two-dimensional, where in this case, the customer is co-developing capability with the supplier, and those lines are somewhat blurred, but it's making both sides much more efficient, and it's helping them generate more value and revenue in the market. So our release of Freight Power primarily was for us to get after the small shipper. And so if you are a small shipper, they can go in there, they can insert their order, they're going to see options. And those options might not always be a Schneider driver and working unit. It could be one of our 70,000 partnered carriers. It's multimodal, and we're going to continue adding and diversifying the mode mix. If you're a large shipper, they're already connected into their ERP or their TMS. You're going to get digital tracking. All the paperwork on the back end is going to be digitized. And what I'm really excited about is in the future, we are developing right now the ability to democratize all of our supply chain capability, our TMS, our WMS, our YMS, and put it through the app so that if shippers want to use their own people executing on our systems, we're okay with that. Because in the end, we really want to help digitize the entire supply chain. It's a win for us, it's a win for you, it's certainly a win for the customer. It allows us to go much faster, and it brings much more freight and volume to our member carriers. Now on the carrier side, while there's a track of folks and investments primarily focused on customer, there's an equal track and team focused on the carrier. So if you're a smaller carrier, you can go in there, you can find your next load. With 3 billion freight under management, you can find your next week's worth of loads in there and start building your network. You also have roadside assistance, fuel discounts. In the future, we're hoping to sell parts. We're in discussions and partnership on Build with Bosch, where they can interact with all of our carriers, and we'll provide all of our capability through the Bosch LOS so that their carriers and customers can also interact with us. It's just a really unique time, and I think it was brought out by all that disruption and change that has happened over the last 2.5 years. So I'm going to conclude my comments, but I'm really excited to speak with you folks and hopefully take the Q&A and then certainly listen to some of the insights from these thought leaders. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We don't need to see that 1 second longer than as necessary. Let me talk to you about who 10th Street is. So we're a software company. We try to connect carriers and drivers. We work with about 4,500 fleets across the country, small as 5 trucks, as big as 15,000. So cover the waterfront. From a driver perspective, about 95% of the experienced drivers in the country have stored their application on our platform. So what that means is when that driver goes to apply at the next carrier, he doesn't have a 45-minute process to key in his application. He has 5-10 minutes, right? And that network, that two-sided network, gives us some really interesting insight. And so what I thought I'd try to do over the next couple minutes is talk about some of the things that we're seeing in the market and how it affects you guys as carriers, and how we're trying to play and be helpful in that space, right? Well, what does that mean? What is like some examples? The first thing we see that's always really interesting, especially in the freight market we've seen, right, recently, is what's going on in the market. And one of the things we believe is that drivers are rational economic actors, and that every day they vote with their feet as to what they're thinking is going to happen, right? So one of the metrics we track is something we call most recent tenure. When that driver goes to apply in any one month, right, how long have they been at their most current employer? Because what we see, if you think about it from a driver's perspective, right, every time that driver changes jobs, it costs them $1,000, $2,000 in income, right, because they're not driving. The process of leaving one carrier and going to another. So they're going to make that decision really carefully, and how they're going to make that decision varies by what they see day in, day out on the market, right? And you may have heard the expression wisdom of the crowds, right? That's one of the things we're trying to do. So when times are good, right? And we've tracked this number, we've got data going back a pretty long time. What we see is the average driver, when they apply, they've been at their carrier 1.8 years before they go through and do a full application, these experienced drivers, right? And what we saw is that number last spring, late last spring, last summer, started to drop, right? And for those of you all in the room, it's probably not that big of a surprise, right? And it dropped, and the good news, if there's any good news in the current economic climate, I think we could all use it, right? Is that the good news is that number seems to have plateaued or hit the floor, maybe, hopefully it's the floor, about November, right? And it's gone from about 1.8 to about 1.4. So it's a pretty substantial drop over the last over the course of 22, and it seems to be bumping around at about that number. And so whether it's a real floor and drivers are saying, hey, things are getting better, right? Or if it's going to continue to drop, time will tell, right? But that's an example of what we try to do with the data that we can see, right? So over the past year, we saw process, I think the number is about 3.7 million unique people, drivers, come across the platform. 3.7 million. Now, a big chunk of those were drivers that a lot of our clients hire students, right? So it's people that were thinking about becoming a driver and didn't, right? And we see some interesting patterns of what happens, right? So the average driver that's driven more than 6 months, so a little bit of experience, but not much. Average drivers in the market 3 times a year, right? Really wide variation, right? For those of you who are in the recruiting space, probably know that a lot of our clients know by name the driver who applies every week, right? There's those, right? And there's a lot of people who drive same place for 20 years. But if you look on average, 3 times a year, your driver's in the market. So if you're looking at your current fleet going, hey, I'm good, the number you should remember is 3 times a year, about every 4 months, your driver's going to dip a toe in the water. Every 4 months. The average driver is connected. Over the course of their career, the average driver across our platform has applied to 20 carriers. Experienced drivers, the drivers with more than 10 years experience, the number goes to 25, right, on average. Some have talked to hundreds. Well, if you think about what carriers are doing in that macro driver shortage environment that we're in, even with weak freight, right, is what are you trying to do with that database? Best practice, you go out and talk to those guys when you need them. What that effect is on those drivers, rather. Think about it. You've connected to 20 carriers. Those drivers are all reaching out to you. Your driver, every one of your drivers that you're either trying to recruit or trying to retain, they get a message every other day. Every other day. More often than that. Average driver gets a marketing message across our platform, right? And we don't work with all carriers, but across our platform, what we see, driver gets a message every 1.7 days on average. More experienced drivers, it's bigger than that, right? It gets down to about every 1.4 days. So if you think there's a lot of competition out there, and drivers are inundated with messages, right? Inundated doesn't begin to describe it, right? It's really, really busy. What does that mean when a driver goes in the market, what do they go do, right? What the driver sees is on average, when they go into that market about 3 times a year, right? The drivers that just dip a toe in the market, right, and just are thinking about making a move, they talk to 2 carriers. As soon as that driver is serious, right, about applying for thinking about making a move, that number goes from 2 to 4, right? If you're a driver, that's a rational economic decision. I'm thinking about it. I'm going to go talk. I'm going to get as many offers as I possibly can. So what that means from a carrier side, again, if you're thinking about recruiting or retaining, if you're recruiting drivers, the deeper somebody gets into your hiring process, the more competition you're facing, right? Don't think, hey, I got the guy to do a full application. I'm in the last lap. If you got him to do a full application, he's going out and talking to two more carriers, right, every day. Right? If you're thinking about retaining your driver, the level of competition and the level of options out there is huge. Okay. What does that mean in terms of, and I'm sorry, I'm like the world's worst presenter because my comments may or may not have anything to do with the slides because I get really excited about Zeta, which is a cry for help, right? And so one of the things we see is drivers, to state the obvious, are predominantly mobile, right? So if you're thinking about your hiring process and you're thinking about tools you're using, if it's not mobile first, right, you're going to lose. 85% of the applications we see come across a mobile device. Obviously we're big believers. We have a driver app called Driver Pulse. About 1.1 million drivers a year use the app, and they're using that to find their next job, interact with safety, interact with recruiting, those sorts of things. The other thing we do is we try to build tools to help clients respond, right? And I'm not going to talk about kind of what we're doing, but just in general, what do we see carriers doing that are winning, right? That are winning either that war to attract and hire drivers, or the competition to retain their drivers as long as possible, sort of keep those drivers. And the first thing we're seeing that carriers do is absolutely have to move fast. And that fast means a couple of things. What we see is carriers that respond within the first 5 minutes of an application being submitted, first 5 minutes, they double their hiring rate. What we see across the platform is, generally speaking, it varies from quarter to quarter. I think Q1 of this year will end up being about 2.6% leads to hires, right? First in to first out, right? Carriers, for the drivers that get responded to really quickly, that number goes to circa 5, right? Keeping in mind that the faster you respond, the less likely it is that that driver goes on to do applications 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right? Minutes absolutely matter. Right? And what that means is it brings up all sorts of operational challenges, right? If you wear multiple hats, that's tough, right? If you have people, hey, no, I'm big enough, I got a dedicated recruiter or a team of recruiters, that's great. But if somebody's on the phone with a candidate for 20 minutes, you've just reduced your chances of hiring somebody. Right? Thing one, move fast. Thing two, not only minutes matter, right? Thing two is days matter, right? Carriers that have a longer hiring cycle have a worse hiring rate. Right? Carriers that have mentioned it was a 2.5, 2.6%. What we see on our clients is the clients that compress that 10-day hiring cycle, 15-day hiring cycle to 6 or 7, they're going to get about, the number goes up to 3.5%, 4%. Right? You can materially move it forward. Right? And so being thoughtful about how do you compress that, how do you tap into the networks that help you go faster. Right? The other thing we see clients doing, and this is a little out of sequence, my apologies, that win is they are extremely diversified in their recruitment advertising. Right? If you look at applications per truck received, the clients that spread those ad dollars a lot of places get a much, much higher number of applications per truck. Advertising's hard. I mean, it's a pain in the neck, right, to go actually play the mechanics. But if you grasp that nettle and you go do it, we absolutely see the return, right? Same spend, more places, you're trying to chase where the drivers is when they're actually looking for their next opportunity, right? And they're out there all the time. The other thing that we're big believers in is the power of interconnection, of interconnected solutions. And what that means is if you're thinking about, hey, I'm wearing my recruiting hat and I'm just thinking about recruiting, one of the biggest things we see people doing where they are winning at a higher conversion rate on recruiting is they overlap recruiting and onboarding. The clients that have a full onboarding experience that they're asking people to do before they hire, meaning onboarding paperwork, supplying copies of documents, and completing pre-hire training or new hire training, to the extent you overlap that, you see massive increases in their hiring rate. Not just in their hiring cycle, hey, I get through the onboarding process faster, that's pretty intuitive. What that tells us is what drivers are very sensitive to is how long they're gonna be out of the truck. How long are they're only making money when they're moving. If you can move that needle forward and you can overlap and reduce their time, right, you're gonna end up with a higher conversion rate. Let's talk about retention. And the power of interconnection when it comes to retention. We do a lot of like surveys and driver engagement things. And what we see is that, especially in those first 90 days of turnover, first 90 days of hire, right? Platform average for us is the average fleet retains new hires only about 62, 65% of new hires make it to 90 days. So you could look across the fleet, look across the platform. The clients that extend that most successfully are the people that most completely interact with their driver, right? The people that are responding to inbound driver issues. Hey, and they improve their retention of new drivers by 10% just by answering the phone. It's the highest ROI phone call you can possibly make. Listen to drivers, respond to drivers. The clients that are leveraging and actively managing safety events and reaching out to drivers, right? They move that number from 62% to 75, 76%, right? And every one of those drivers retained is another driver they don't have to hire. The value of interconnection is absolutely real. But the interesting thing, the thing that was a little counterintuitive, is it goes the other way. We do CSA monitoring for clients. And one of the things we noticed was, if you look at the number of CSA violations per truck per quarter, and you say, what happens to those carriers that are doing those things around retention, right? Guess what? When you engage it with retention, the number of CSA violations per truck goes down. Hey, when you do add MVR monitoring, it goes down, right? When you add the interesting thing is when you add a fuel management component, it tends to go down even more. The more completely and more consistently you can have that message to drivers of, hey, we're wanting to engage with you and not treat you like a fungible asset, it absolutely works, right? And those are the tools we try to bring, right? So obviously, I love data, right? I love thinking about that stuff. And so we went from like big industry issues to, hey, this is exactly what we're seeing on the ground. So hopefully that was kind of helpful. And with that, I'll turn you over to Luke and talk about sort of the interconnection beyond sort of what 10th Street brings.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, guys.
That was the perfect segue, because we've heard from Janusz what's happening in the industry from a transformation standpoint. We heard from Mike how digitalization is critical to his business. We heard from Tim, speed, and then how do we connect it? So before I talk about what we're doing to connect that all together, we have a short video to show you what we're doing. What we identified was the one last piece that's missing, and that's the connectivity. Because what we can hear from industry leaders such as 10th Street, Schneider, National, is that they're continuing to build these digital solutions because data's there, information is there, but what's missing is the ability to connect it, to put it together. And where I started our conversation about how well we know your vehicles, that's our anchor point, not in solutions, but in knowing the critical element that makes transportation work, and that's the vehicle. And so if I talk about a digital supply chain and connecting that all together, make it very simple for our example today, and let's just focus on a vehicle. Each and every one of you add assets to your fleets. All right, so what do you have to do just to get that asset onto the road? You have to finance it, you have to insure it, you have to go through multiple steps before you can even put a driver in the seat. And then once you have that vehicle that's road ready, then you have to put a driver into the seat, and you have to train those drivers. You have to ensure that those drivers are compliant. Then once that vehicle is on the road, there are daily, weekly, annual things that have to occur. You have to fuel that vehicle. You have to maintain that vehicle. You may have to have emergency assistance on that vehicle. And then, how does that vehicle make you money? Not every fleet acts the same. The order-to-cash processes could be different. The transportation management systems that are used could vary, and their needs are varied based on the fleet and how you manage your business. All the way through this value chain to the point of what do you do with the vehicle when you no longer need it anymore? There are multiple providers across this entire value chain that you interact with. It's not 50, it's not 100. Through the entire course and life cycle of that vehicle, the number of touch points that you have with different organizations is substantial. In some cases, it's literally daily when it comes to telematics information, when it may come to maintenance information, when it comes to anyone that uses load boards to access freight. Multiple load boards could be open every single day. So the number of partners or providers of information, of services that you deal with on a life cycle of your vehicle is significant. We are building a platform to reduce that inefficiency, to reduce that waste. That's the value that Bosch is bringing to transportation and logistics. We don't have the solutions for driver management, for supply chain management, for fueling, for telematics. We're building the platform that connects the data, the relevant data, for you to be able to access those solutions with the trusted providers that you have today or that you find in the future, because they bring value to you. That's what this logistics operating system is that Bosch is building. And if you think about it, we obviously named this very intentionally, an operating system. Each and every one of us has at least one, if not two, in front of us right now. You know, they're Android or they're iOS. And what does it do? Any operating system at its core will bring multiple pieces of information, solutions, apps together in one spot. That's the bare minimum of an operating system. A good operating system will connect the relevant data across those applications and across those solutions to provide more value than simply a 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. And that's what the logistics operating system aims to do. Now, you saw in the video supply chain solutions, warehousing solutions. That's the end state. That's the vision. That's the end goal. Where we're starting is with solutions from the best partners in the business that solve the major pain points and the highest cost drivers for you today. We're talking about driver management. We're talking about supply chain solutions. We're talking about fueling. We're talking about maintenance. We're talking about telematics. We're talking about a smart load board, an intelligent load board for anyone that uses load boards to find freight, reducing that significant amount of overlap that Janusz talked about, putting a little bit of logic behind it to make recommendations so that dispatchers can do what dispatchers do the best, and that isn't search through multiple load boards to find the best load, but the dispatcher can do their job more effectively. These are the types of solutions that are on the logistics operating system by Bosch. What does it mean from a value standpoint? Back to my phone analogy, we use your face or our thumb to get in access, a single point of access, if you will, to your phone. Well, that's a feature that's critical, that's a must. Think about reducing the number of screens that your employees have to deal in, logging out of different systems on a daily basis, just to be able to do their job if they have access to it in one point. What about discovery of the solutions, like some of those that we heard today, that are there? That not only are they there in a marketplace to see and discover, but knowing when you select those solutions, now the relevant data comes together. So now the relevant data from telematics and maintenance can be brought together into your view. The relevant data from driver management and telematics could also be brought in to provide very specific, very concrete training for a driver based on their specific driving habits and behaviors. The opportunity to connect this relevant data truly is limitless because it's no longer a one-to-one need for connectivity, but now it's a one-to-many. That's the real power of what we are doing. That's the value that we see to really grow our pie in transportation and logistics. Because if we can reduce that waste, that's not competition from one carrier to another carrier. That's reducing waste and increasing efficiency that makes you better at doing your job. Makes you better at finding those loads that work for you. Makes strategic partners better at providing solutions to you that may not exist today, but they now have the opportunity through that connectivity to exist tomorrow. So that's what we're bringing to this. And we can do that because we know that asset that's on the road so well. And that's where we build these relationships with the best in their respective businesses to bring that together into one view. We're going to transition to a Q&A. I'm going to ask Steve Sikora from our Bosch team to come up and do that. You'll see Steve has a wonderful blue vest on that I encourage you at the end of the breakfast this morning. You'll find a few of us that have these on. Please come up and talk a little bit more about us if you have any questions or anything about this logistics operating system. We'd be happy to have that discussion. And and Steve brought prizes too. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Hey, thanks, Luke. We're going to change it up here a little bit just to try to create a little excitement. Chip, can I ask you to come up, please? Thank you very much for being the first attendee to join us today. Chip, you're with Upstation? Very good. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day. One of the things that Luke just referred to, please stop by after the Q&A session. There's a number of us here in attendance. We really would like to answer any and all questions that you might have. As you've heard today, information about the digital transformation that our industry is going through and the need for collaboration. It takes a community. And one of the things that we would like for you to focus on, I've got a couple of questions that I've kind of primed up for each one of the panel members to discuss. And then after one of those questions each, we'll open it up to the audience for questions. But I'd like you to frame up the questions in regards to, what are those burning hot points that first came to mind during the panel members' discussion today, number one. But also keep in mind the fact that collaboration within the industry and the supply chain environment is really more like a community. As most of you know, this is a tight-knit community that we operate in. Many of us know each other from different facets of life. I mean, I've worked with 3 of the gentlemen here in different phases of my career. And so it takes everybody to participate together to solve many of the problems that we see today. So think about that as you frame up your questions, because that kind of information sharing is extremely important for us. So let me pop this open here real quick. All right. So the first question is going to be for Mike Kukala. Mike, please, can you share your view on how carriers of all sizes can benefit from collaboration with large logistics providers like Schneider?
Yeah, great. I'm on. Okay. So I think, right now we have over 70,000 carriers within our Schneider umbrella. We also have 2,500 owner-operators in. And as I alluded to in my opening remarks, we've been at logistics for over 30 years. And it started on data analytics and supply chain, and then it broke off into brokerage. And what's interesting is on our brokerage side, you have a heavy concentration of what we call micro carriers and mid-size carriers or fleet owners. And then on the supply chain side, you have a heavy concentration of very large carriers. So in that mix, we're already servicing a vast array. I think where we're really trying to figure out is the niches. We service just about every state in the country. Brokerage is very strong on dry van, intermodal, LTL. We're very strong in all of those, but also bulk transport. Janis talked a little bit about final mile. We have a pretty extensive network in that. We want to grow that more. And I think for the carriers that are interested in joining us, certainly understanding where you're strong at, but related to the theme of the breakfast, how do we connect with you most effectively? Because what we don't want to have are people that are calling your people. We really want our systems capturing those orders, putting it out there, or directly sending it to you so that it's in a much more digital fashion, because it makes us more efficient. It certainly makes you more efficient, and allows us to respond to our customers much more quickly. It's interesting, when I started this 10 years ago, the lead time that we would get from customers, you could measure that in anywhere from 5 to 15 days. That is not the case anymore. They've narrowed that lead time to a much shorter window, and it's really because they're starting to drive more efficiency in their operations. They got to stay very lean, so they're producing to sell. And as that kind of goes through their ERP, their production mix, and then translates into an order to us, we've got to be able to respond. It's a luxury to get 48 hours. In most cases, it has to be sooner than that. So having folks that are qualified and registered in our system, having them connected either into the FreightPower app or EDI API from our TMS to enable us to respond much more quicker in that spot type of environment helps us to succeed. On the contract side, once we have you in our system and we're seeing where you play at, we're already looking at the data to understand, based on your geographic coverage of the orders that you've taken from us, where's your sweet spot? And as we're starting to receive contractual tenders or network RFPs from our customers, we're already soliciting feedback from you on, are you interested in participating in this, and trying to match that up. So in many ways, we're trying to be proactive to help pull you in, because we understand, as a trucking company that had very humble roots, what it's like when you're managing, when you're the driver and you're managing the office, or in some cases you have dual hats into your operation.
And as a follow-up to that, Mike, what are some of the carrier management offerings or services that you provide to help carriers conduct their business?
Certainly. So first off, from a demand standpoint, if you remember my first slide, just about every service capability leverages a third-party solution, in many cases to augment our own driver and working unit. So we create a tremendous amount of demand for the carriers that we bring in. And then, as I alluded to on my last slide, within Freight Power, we have the fuel discounts, you have the roadside maintenance assistance. We try to automate tracking and updates to our end customer because we really don't want you folks to get caught up into that, and we certainly don't want drivers to have to stop and call you so that you can tell us where the asset's at. So helping, getting that connectivity set up allows us to be more efficient. Where we're going to go in the future, certainly to bring more demand to the table. We'd like to take that $3 billion freight under management and double that over the next 3 to 5 years. But also, one of the ideas we're playing around with is, do we offer as a service helping the micro, the small, and the mid-sized fleet owners with connectivity? If EDI and API is not something that you have the technical team or shop to build, can we start deploying that for you and build in those API rate calls? Again, it makes us faster, it opens up more demand for you, it just makes both of our operations more efficient.
Great, great. Now I'd like to open up to questions from the audience to Mike. Raise your hand, please. Got a mic coming to you.
Yeah. Jaime Herrera with Gamer Logistics in El Paso.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, sir. We've seen, and I think everybody's lived it, that pricing on these RFPs is just tanking. So what you guys expect, and what are you guys seeing on the side of Schneider concerning where's the bottom line as we face the pressure of margins eroding, where our driver pay, we cannot negotiate with them and bring it down.
Yeah.
Neither the cost of the trucks, the fuel, that's relative. That goes up and down. But the maintenance and the parts, everything's up. And the rates are evaporating.
Yeah.
So where does it end? What do you expect? What's the strategy that you guys are using to deliver value to the customers and try to keep up?
Yeah, so a great question. Just to restate the question, it's based, what's our interpretation of the market right now, recognition that we're in a less favorable market from a carrier and a fleet owner perspective than where we were 12 months ago, and then, what are Schneider's thoughts on where it's at, where it's going, and how are we communicating that to the customer? So I'll hit a little bit on the transport side of our shop, but I'm going to talk more from a vein of the logistics side, because I'm in the middle of the carrier and the customer, so I can give you a little bit of perspective on what I'm seeing in that space. I think from a market standpoint, and these are Mike Kukella's comments based on managing networks for our customers, what I'm seeing is that the market started to soften about the second quarter of last year, and it consistently has gone down from a demand. You could see in about the end of the third quarter, spot price was starting to fall significantly, and that usually falls. When you start to see the demand drop, you start to see the spot price drop. And then my experience for doing this for the last 20 years is somewhere between 3 and 6 months, once you see the spot price start to go down, the contract rate follows suit. We are in the middle of bid season right now. The bids that we are running on behalf of our customers, the savings are pretty substantial. So we're seeing some significant reductions. I would say, upper single digit is what we're doing on behalf of, from logistics on behalf of our customers. With that said, we also understand that the cost of insurance, the cost of equipment, the cost of fuel is not dropping down at such a high rate. And so now I'm going to transition to my logistics side as I'm interacting with customers. What I try to convey to customers is you have to start thinking differently than what you did 10 years ago. And most of the folks that are in the transportation departments of these customers have been doing this for 15, 20 years. And my push to them is the market cycles are completely different than where they were in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, you could go 5 to 7 years and you might see a change in the cycle where it would shift from carrier to shipper or shipper back to carrier. And oftentimes, if you really look at the history of the cycle, they favored the shipper. That has completely changed. 18 to 24 months, you're starting to see the market cycles change dramatically. Data is much more prevalent. You can see it in DAT, you can see it in cash, you can see it in all the different indexes that are out in the market. Rate, volume changes every 18 to 24 months. When they change, it is incredibly severe, meaning the customer generally is paying north of 30% for transportation costs when they have to go to a spot market. They're generally seeing high single digit to 15% in the contract market. That's the same case when the market drops, what the carriers are starting to experience. So we're both in this weird environment where we're seeing the cycles compress, the volatility increase, and my message to the customers are, you can't push them that hard that you're going to force them to make really tough decisions or leave you, because in about 18 months, they're going to do it back to you. And so the strategy in my mind needs to be more of a capacity stacking solution in the routing guide, where your outbound lanes that are facing a customer's end customer, you want more dedicated, you want higher service, you're going to pay a little bit more for that. And we need to protect that, and those should be longer cycle relationships between the carrier and the shipper. In that middle mile, those are great opportunities for you to have a truck and a rail or intermodal solution so that you can capture savings, but you can also get sustainability credit for that. And then on the inbound side, with the exception of production, that's a little bit unique, where you might be using a lot of LTL, those are great opportunities to have consolidation points set up, to leverage more brokers, to be much more agile and get savings within your network. When a shipper starts to move from looking at individual lanes and how do I get savings on every single one to what is my overall network and how do I get a total landed cost value that doesn't degrade fulfillment in a tough market and operational performance, that's when we see them perform much stronger over a 3 to 5 year horizon. Now on the carrier side, the same argument, the same principles apply, but in a little bit different fashion. If we're looking at making a margin on every single order, you're going to be at somewhat of a disadvantage in those inbound lanes. So it's really thinking about your overall relationship. How does that network match within that customer's network? And are you generating a positive margin within that operation? So it's a unique discussion. What I've seen, though, from customers, and maybe this provides a little bit of encouragement to the room, they're much more receptive to this message than in any other time that I've talked about it over the last 10 years. And it's because the last 2 years have been so severe. Most of these customers are on their second job, if that gives you any indication of how severe it was for them. So they're much more responsive. They want the savings when we show them the network optimization and we do the bids. And we steer them towards this is the low-hanging fruit that you can get after. But then we're also advocating you need to be very defensive. And those core carriers that have been with you and they're performing at a high level, maybe it's not smart to bid out every quarter or every year. Maybe we base our pricing expectations off indexes, and you hold on to them in the network and you ride with them so that you can improve your service and fulfillment. Did that answer your question, sir?
Okay, great. Well, thank you for asking that question. If I could ask you to come up and have a nice little token of our appreciation for participation. There you go. So, and you're with Gamer Logistics. Yes, sir. Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, now I'm going off script a little bit. This is not the Bosch engineered way, but did anybody notice anything different during that video? Thank you for showing that video. I thought it was a great opportunity to display our approach. Anybody see anything different? Yes, sir.
European truck.
I'm sorry?
European truck.
You got it. Thank you very much. Come on up. Another token of our appreciation. Thank you, sir. Patrick, you're with? Algorithmic Logistics. Okay, very good. Algorithmic Logistics. Algorithmic Logistics. Thank you.
Steve, may I
All
comment
right.
why?
Thanks for the participation. All right.
Steve,
The next question?
Steve, let me address why, if I may.
Absolutely.
All right. One thing that I didn't touch on because the relevancy of our audience here, we're obviously in the U.S. market. Bosch is launching this logistics operating system truly globally, and in the video it said that. We're launching that in Europe and in India as well as the United States, so that's why there is truly an international approach to it. And while for our purposes in this discussion here, most of us are focused in one region or in North America, but from a partner perspective, as well as when we start to continue to grow that supply chain view out, as I indicated, you start to get into some transatlantic or trans-Pacific operations. Some of the partners that are a part of the network aren't only providing solutions on the platform in our North American market, but also in other markets that LOS will participate. That's part of the international flair of the video, but more importantly, just how big and expansive this endeavor is, because it isn't just connecting the U.S. transportation and logistics industry. We're truly talking about the interconnectivity of North America, which is relevant for our business, and I know some of you are across Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, but also then those touch points for freight as it moves from other countries, other parts of the world into the United States.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. Great explanation. All right, next question for Janusz. Where do you see the risks and rewards within the digital transformation process for carriers adopting new technologies?
Let me start with the opportunities and the rewards. One of the things that we have talked about is managing through business cycles, getting your costs in a position where you can actually still be profitable when the rates dive down. I think that's where the opportunity of digitization, of transformation is truly great. I mean, we look at our costs and say, okay, how much is driver costs, how much if it is maintenance costs, how much of it is customer service costs, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the big opportunities, leveraging technology, leveraging digital solutions to get after those in a almost like a ruthless manner, to say how do we continue to drive down the costs across your entire business. I mean, you mentioned about from a customer care side, having to look at multiple screens. That's pretty prevalent. Now, how much efficiency can you drive if you have to look at a single screen in terms of productivity, in terms of those kinds of things? So that's where the opportunity is, whether it's on the operational efficiency side or frankly even on the revenue management side. Part of it is, am I choosing the right loads? Now, as an industry, we still are looking at about 20 to 25% empty miles, right? I mean, what does it look like in your business? Can you leverage the aspects of load acceptance? Can you leverage those kinds of aspects to drive better efficiency even on the revenue management side? So overall, from a profitability standpoint, I think that's a great opportunity. The other thing that Mike said, which is absolutely true, is this relationship between the shippers, the BCOs, what have you, and the carriers, and how those have been managed through business cycles, right? And for the last 2 years, carriers have had the upper hand, but I remember 2008 when, I worked at Schneider at that time, where the prices were so low, you literally had to scrape because the demand had softened to a certain extent. So the leverage of technology to what we are calling smart contracts now, so how do you actually manage this thing better, how contracts become a lot more agile, I think is pretty important. The other thing that Mike said, which is really, really important, is the cycles. The cycles are shrinking, and they are. The speed at which things are happening is faster and faster. And even if you look at the financial industry, what happened with SVB was because the rates at which, the rate at which the rates went up. So for carriers to think about how to leverage, technology to be a lot more agile in the business is critical. I don't think any of us can predict the black swan events, like the ship getting caught in the Suez Canal. What you can control is your agility, is how quickly can you respond to those, to take advantage of the market situations, if you will, when they present themselves, but also to mitigate the risk when things start to go sort of like against you, like to your point, the carriers and the shippers. So that's where I think the opportunities are. On a broader scale, the opportunities are some of the things we talked about, like sustainability, and so on and so forth. Transportation and logistics is, nothing will move, right? It's about 10% of any GDP, of any economy. 10% of it is transportation logistics. So there is a huge sort of opportunity to have an impact on sustainability aspects and so on and so forth if we can address, and I shouldn't say if, when we address some of the things that we talked about earlier. On the risk side, what I see is when we talk about digital transformation, and I actually, I'm going to pick up on a word that Luke presented, is data lake. What data lake essentially means is that you're freeing up your data to do the kinds of things that we have talked about, the connectivity. For a company like Schneider, within the four walls, you're going to have hundreds of applications which need to talk to each other to drive that kind of experience. But the other side of this that we have talked about is outside your four walls, which is where something like the Bosch logistics platform is playing. How do I make the connectivity easier across the four walls, right? So the risk, what I see in this is not approaching it, purely from that data lake standpoint. What are you using the data lake for? What are the kinds of business outcomes that you're trying to drive, which should be driving a lot of these conversations? So the risk I see sometimes is technology for the sake of technology. Technology where you just implement it because it's the thing that is happening in the market, right? My view is that if you over-index on that, digital transformation is really about a partnership between the business and technology aspects of any organization. If you over-index on any one of them, I'm not sure that you're going to drive the outcomes that you're looking for. And that's what I see a big risk. Either it is over-index on the business side, or it is over-index on the technology side, which is not going to give you the business outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think Janis brought up a great point. Our CEO and our Chief Operating Officer, before we deploy any technology, we put more effort in understanding the underlying workflow process and making sure that process is lean, efficient as possible, and then we insert the technology on top of it. And then one other thing Janis brought up that triggered a thought, I think as carriers and fleet owners, if you're connected to key partners and they have a vast freight under management system and they have the ability to bring in demand, going back to that capacity stacking comment that I made, if we can establish a rate with a customer that's good for both sides, and then we can index it against a DAT or a CAS, and then measure it over time so that if the market's going up, a little bit more goes into your rate. If the market's going down, the shipper gets a little bit of benefit, but overall it's staying somewhat static. Could be DAT plus 5 or DAT plus 10. That gives you much more predictability on how to manage. It gives the customer predictability, because the worst thing on the customer side, because I interact with them so much, is when the market changes either up or down and they don't have an answer for somebody inside their own shop. That's usually when they overreach and they start doing drastic things. So to Janis's point, if you're connected and you can establish some type of control around that demand cycle and you have a partner that can help bring that for you, you're going to be much, much stronger off.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Janis?
Okay. So I work for Berkshire Hathaway Homestay Companies. We specialize in transportation insurance and insure fleets. My question is, what are some of the pain points that you're experiencing when trying to insure these fleets? And then conversely, what are some improvements that you would like to see made on the insurance side to help insure these fleets, lower cost, et cetera? And I know it's a little off topic. It's not a fleet owner type question, but insurance side, the insurance of these fleets. Are there pain points that you're experiencing or changes you'd like to see made?
Yeah, I think maybe from a Schneider side, and again, my personal disclaimer, I am not the expert on establishing insurance for individual fleets within our side, but I think tort reform would be something we would like. And when you have these runaway assessments, it makes it really difficult. And there are certain regions in the country where you just really have to question, does it make economical sense to even deliver anymore in there? Because one mistake could be catastrophic to your business. So from just understanding the broader industry and interacting with all the carriers on our side, that would be my response to your question.
One quick comment on that is the elements the attributes that define risk. And I think that's where the opportunity is. One of the things I talked about earlier was the granularity of data, and it's the sort of like, personalization, if you will, of the different entities. I think that's where I see the opportunity to be a lot tighter on the estimation of risk, based on what it is and who is it that you're trying, frankly, to insure.
And to that point, specifically to build off of Janus's statement, here's the value of being able to connect what used to be disparate systems or disparate pieces of data to make it very specific. Because with the specifics of the telematics data, the fleet's management data, the insurance data, then you can really drill into what exactly is that calculation. It's not a table anymore. Now it's specific into the business, and there's real value in driving safety from a driver standpoint to really drive down that cost of insurance. That's the opportunity when you can start to connect the relevant data points.
Hello, my name is Alvaro Molestina. I'm from Ecuador. Sorry in advance for my English, but we as a small country, we're one of the biggest companies of transportation there. We have 60 trucks. It ain't much, but with 3PLs, we make like 120 trucks, and all together, we're like 30 people, besides the truck drivers. And we're facing like a big trouble receiving by many ways, many mails, WhatsApp, many other platforms, messages, calls, communication, and it's pretty hard to address them without getting the idea or the perception that they're not getting the help they wanted. I mean, we have to be fast, otherwise they get the impression that we don't care about them. We've made a lot of innovative solutions. We made a platform so the client get their transportations through the platform. But the particularity of our business, it's mainly, we make in Ecuador little cross-docking because it's a small country, and we go to the factories to charge to load the merchandise and go directly to the port. And so that's our main business, and the data that they need to put in the platform, it's like it's not short. They have to put product. They have to put a date of the loading truck. They have to put booking, shipping agency, weight, a lot of data, and maybe that is a little hard on them. So we're in a trouble for one side. I would guess, and I don't remember which one of you said that logistics, it's the growing department, it's the growing area. But on the other side, we have a main issue. Getting to get the customer service. It is really so. We're in trouble thinking if we have to grow the logistics side or grow the customer service side. So what are your suggestions on that matter?
So I do not currently do any business in Ecuador, so I can't speak specific to your country, but I do a lot of business in Mexico, and WhatsApp, as great as it has its application or its value stream, it is like the bane of my operation down there, because what you just described is what I see interactions from my customers into our customer service team. A lot of it's that WhatsApp text, and they're sending orders. It's so frustrating that last year I sent what I call a process SWAT team down into Mexico City just to understand why are we receiving orders and communication through WhatsApp, and how do I eliminate it, because it's completely non-standard and it creates extra work. And what you just described, I have to add headcount. We had to add headcount as well. That approach of going in there and really diagnosing with the customer's help, because what I shared with the customer is this is not sustainable. I'm adding headcount and you're going to pay the cost for that headcount. So when we brought them into the mix and we walked through the life of an order, and what triggers a message through WhatsApp, and what are you looking to get back out of that, and asked the questions and then played back the data for them, it was pretty apparent that there's a tremendous amount of cost on my side and inefficiency that was being driven originally by the customer. And when we were enabled to play back that story through data and visualization and a process map, that's when they recognized their side of the problem, and that's when we started getting breakthrough. Now, since then, I've been able to take out a pretty sizable chunk of headcount out of that particular team from a percentage of the overall team, and certainly the customer has gotten a reduced rate on that. But my recommendation to you would be, number one, I think you got to raise awareness to the customer on ask the questions. What's driving this? What do you need? Is there a better way? Let's partner on this to make it much more digital. Sending texts or messages through WhatsApp is, in my mind, not digital, because somebody's got to pick up a phone and then they got to do something somewhere else with that data. What you really want are two systems talking to each other, and then it drives the activity afterwards. But start with the questions, do a process mapping and visualization with them, and then come back to them with ideas on, here's a better tech solution that will make both of us more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some of the themes that we talked about today, right? I mean, you said we need a community. That's where this interaction between yourself and your customer is pretty important, because technology will not be able to solve, all these issues. And I don't know if it's, courage or, partnership or whatever the word there is, but that sort of collaborative approach is fairly critical. So to Mike's point, reaching outside your four walls and saying this is important, I believe is critical. I think the second thing I would say is, this whole aspects of omni-channel. There are technologies which drive towards standardization. One of the things that we have been talking to Luke and Steve about is to say, okay, if orders are actually coming in through, say, your telephone network or what have you, there's a certain degree of automation that can happen, right?
Yeah.
Or through email, you can scrape the data and so on and so forth. But it will not be solved only by that element, as Mike just said. The conversation about standardization of processes, receiving orders through multiple channels in some sort of a format, I think will be incredibly important. And I think it's what I said earlier, right? Don't look at it only from a tech standpoint. Address it on a business plus technology standpoint to get after it.
Yeah, and there's going to be some customers that you interact with that will not change anything that they do. We all have them. That's where I think if you go through and you do the process mapping, to Janus's point, there are very agile and cheap applications you can do within your own shop, like the construction of robotic process automation. If you're receiving the same chat update or the same email, you can build a RPA that extracts the right data out of it and inputs it into your system so that you're not adding headcount. In that particular case, you're going to want to ask for somebody either on your tech side or outside to help you build that. But that's an easy, cheap, and quick way to get around some of those customer friction points.
Okay. Thank you very much for being one of our valued international participants. Okay, next question is for Tim from 10th Street. Tim, our industry has undergone tremendous change over the last 20 years. How has 10th Street evolved to continue to add value to the marketplace?
Yeah, I think what we've seen, and I think what you guys are probably living every day, is the table stakes as far as speed continue to rise, right? You have to be faster and faster. So I think there's lots of tools that we brought to the table that we see our most successful clients deploying. And at the same time, I mentioned tort reform. The level of nuclear verdicts is pretty scary, right? So the level of the regulatory compliance, right, where regulatory isn't just DOT, but also FCRA and de facto drivers that are insurable, case law, et cetera, right? The stakes of getting it wrong while you're moving so fast continues to rise, right? And so we've spent a ton of time trying to help clients get and stay compliant, which is just never ending given sort of the creativity of the plaintiff's bar, quite frankly.
Great. Any questions from the audience for Tim? We have time for about one more question.
Hi, my name is Mishak from Firebrand. We do marketing in the transportation space for the last 15 years. And one thing that I've noticed, I'm a geek, I'm a creative as well as a geek. And it's kind of a general question, perhaps for everybody if you want to field it. But as we get more digital, as we embrace more technologies, robotics, automated vehicles, AI, increasingly this is a subject we're seeing today. The way I see the supply chain is we're essentially a human chain. How do you kind of continue to embrace that humanity, within your company, and how you communicate to the outside world, and how do you focus on more human-centric outcomes? Like, how do we kind of retain that humanity in the way that we not just run our business, but the outcomes that we see and the way that we kind of speak to our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I can take sort of the first crack on that of what we see. I think it's great, and I think there's a really valid concern there around carriers treating drivers as numbers, not as people. And the reality of what we see on the ground is that if you treat a driver like a number, the driver is essentially going to treat a carrier like a number, right? And so it's in everybody's best interest to actually have more human connections. And that's the carriers we see that win today and that we see winning into the future are those that get the automation, right? Get the cost improvements, but do it with a human face. Because humans are so important to that mix, right? Both on the carrier side and on the driver side. And because we're obviously really focused on that interface between drivers and carriers. And the drivers have lots and lots of choices. And not surprisingly, they want to be someplace that treats them like a human being and like a professional that they are, right? And so we preach that kind of every day to clients of, hey, how do you get smarter, but not faceless, not faceless.
And maybe one example from customer interaction. So one of the initiatives I'm working on now is how to make our interactions between our customer service team and our customers effortless. And what we're seeing now in the CS space is customers have problems. They have to pick up a phone and call and talk to somebody within our shop. They have to go through a myriad of platforms or tools to get the answer and give it back. What independent research has suggested is that, number one, customers, they want more proactive management by their suppliers to get after the problem before they actually happen. And then secondly, they want to do self-help. They don't want to have to talk to, in that particular case, a human to go get an answer. They want to be able to go into an app or a platform or a dashboard, get the answer that they need, make a change, and then correct it. And so on our side, with that realization, it's how do we get our people away from chasing the work that's no longer valuable to be focused on the forward problem that may happen by you're monitoring the dashboard and the trends and you're getting in front of that. And then how do you push data so that customers can be much more informed? Where I think the future on that customer side is our account managers, our sales reps, are they much more intuitive of what's going on in the operation? And are they not only solving for what the customer is asking for now, but are they teaching insights on where that customer is going to be in their industry vertical so that the customer after the engagement is, I learned something, I now have something that's going to help me differentiate in the marketplace. I think that's where we need to go from that human to human. So it's automation and digital doesn't take humans out of the mix, it just empowers them to be more impactful in those human to human relationships.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. So earlier we talked about the personalization element. So if you think about the driver, what is it about the driver that you can use to improve the experience for him or her? Right? That's where the personalization element sort of comes in, where they want to be at home at a certain time, and so on and so forth. I think that to Mike's point, and what we have talked about earlier is to think about the sort of like interaction between technology and people, and what is it that differentiates you. So for example, if a dispatcher is spending 3-4 hours a day, to the case that was mentioned earlier, just looking through loads, is there a value add to that? Or would the dispatcher rather spend their time managing the relationships with the drivers, or in smaller fleets, even with customers, right? So it's that element to say that what is it that can be digitized, and what is it that differentiates you in terms of that human interaction, and then indexing on that, which is where I believe the balance is sort of to settle in.
Great, great. Tell you what, we'll have time for one more question in the back of the room.
Yeah, thank you. Lee DeVasier with Pitney Bowes. Piggyback on the last question, how are you guys thinking about autonomous with either intrastate, interstate? How are you guys thinking about that?
Well, from a Schneider perspective, and again, I'm going to couch it by, I'm on the logistics side, not the asset side, so I'm going to give you a broad answer, but I would welcome you to go into our website and get some of the publication. It is a topic that we're studying, a topic we're interested in, and a topic that we're piloting in. And now I'm going to channel to my personal thoughts from a logistics expert in the space. I'm really struggling with how do you do autonomous in a city environment where you've got turn, and all these other third-party variables that they got to manage. Where you're doing more of a redistribution loop from longer haul facility, a plant to a plant, or a warehouse to a warehouse, and you're on, over the road. I could see where that could make sense, and I believe that the best use case, and it's probably more widely being piloted amongst the carriers that I've talked to, is inside a facility as like a yard horse. That could, in my mind, could certainly make sense because you can control all the different variables within that space. But I think from a Schneider perspective, that electric vehicles, those are all things that we are participating in, studying, and trying to understand where does that fit within our future.
We see that obviously from the supply side. So we're very connected to not only the autonomous topic, but I'm glad that Mike also talked about alternative fuels, and I would add to that also potential for hydrogen fuel cell.
Agreed.
And we think that, one, increased levels of automation will occur in the commercial vehicle space long before they occur in the passenger car space, just because of the control that you're able to put around it in specific use cases that take a significant amount of the overall miles traveled of freight versus the individual miles that we travel in our cars. So we're very, very aligned to that. We work with literally every OEM, startup as well as traditional, that is working on systems to increase the levels of autonomy. It's not going to be like what we thought 5 years ago, where we're going to wake up one day and vehicles, commercial trucks are going to be driving platoon down the road on the highway with no driver. It's going to take a long, long time if we ever get to a level 5 of autonomy. There is significant value to getting to level 2, to getting to level 2+. And that isn't eliminating a driver, it's making them more efficient in what they do. It's eliminating some of the tasks that are required, as well as increasing the level of safety that is there with the existing system in place that includes a driver. That's what we'll continue to see not only tested, but then start to see deployed. And where these topics of autonomy and alternative fuels start to come together is there are going to be natural breakpoints then that in a hub-to-hub type of environment that you could see make a lot of sense for hydrogen refueling stations. Because when you talk about an electrified grid to handle EV vehicles, when you talk about a hydrogen network, these don't exist like our diesel network exists today, like our gasoline network exists today. So there's an opportunity then for us to say what makes sense, because we're not building it off of the network that exists today if that's not what is going to be there in the future. So if we do have the opportunity to have increased levels of autonomy, that will have a significant impact on what that fueling network will look like into the future. And so this isn't a one carrier or a OEM type of opportunity. It's the supply side to those OEMs, it's the carriers that are using those vehicles, it's the infrastructure, and from a government standpoint of how do we build this and make it sustainable so it doesn't make a good news story that we have electrified and hydrogen fuel cell automated vehicles, but there's a true environmental impact. It reduces the carbon footprint. That's the end goal. Increases the amount of safety that is on the roads. That's the end goal. So being able to truly drive those sustainable results is where this will lead.
Yeah, and back to your autonomous question, I thought it made me chuckle as I was thinking about it. So I had a customer boldly declare to me that, you will no longer need drivers in 5 years and the market will be indexed. That was about 9 years ago. And I think what we're realizing is there's a lot of questions you got to ask, whether it be the electric vehicles, the autonomous vehicles, or the alternative fuels. What happens with an autonomous vehicle that just stops in the middle of a highway? How do you maintain that? We talked about tort reform. Can you imagine a lawyer and what their appetite would be if you have an autonomous vehicle that happens to get into a mishap? So there's just a lot of questions. What makes me really encouraged is that there's a lot of folks asking a question. I haven't seen a lot of grand visions of what it's going to be. I see a lot of folks that are in the journey, asking the right questions, moving the topic forward, and certainly super proud that Schneider's involved in this, and I really like our leadership stance in all of these categories. And so I just think to Luke's point, we have to dabble, we have to experiment, we have to push ourselves, but we've got to do it in a responsible way, and we got to ask questions along the way.
And I'd like to add one thing. So if anyone has any questions about automated driving and trucking with driver in, good experiences, bad experiences, or you want to learn more about it, I work for Bosch. I'm over here after the show if you want to come chat. I'd love to talk to you.
We have a spot between Giannis and I if you want to come too.
Okay, thank you, panel. That concludes the Q&A session. I'll turn it over to.
Want to give him? You got one more goodie, right?
I'll turn it over to Luke for a final wrap.
So I want to end where I started, and that's a thank you to all of you. We appreciate the time that you invested with us this morning. We hope you got something out of it. I know that we did from your questions. They tell us where your head's at, and that's critically important for us. The panelists, as well as I mentioned, the Bosch associates will be sticking around. There's no rush to get out of the room. So if you have any further questions or you'd like to have any additional dialogue, please do so. I would like to also thank Tim and Mike and Janusz for taking this leap with me when I said, hey, I'm going to go up on stage at Matt's, and that's all it took, and they said yes. And so I want to thank all three of you very much for taking the time to join us here in Louisville and to be a part of this discussion. And also, finally, I'd like to thank the Bosch team that put this together, because this wasn't just a half a day and put it together with the click of a button. This took a significant amount of effort to make it run as smoothly as it did today, and also ensure that we had the quality of the discussion that we had with you. So collectively, if we can give everyone a round of applause, thank you. Have a great show. They have opened the doors, so if you don't have anything that you'd like to discuss with us, the show is now open, and we'll be here. Thank you very much.